Hello, I wanted to send a video note about dissociative disorders. And dissociative disorders are often confused with schizophrenia, and they are significantly different. They are not the same. It is a myth that schizophrenia and dissociative disorders are the same because they are not. They are separate categories. They have separate presentations. I think one of the confusions with this is that people think, which they do not, but people think that people with schizophrenia have multiple personalities, and they do not. That is not a symptom of schizophrenia. Instead, that is a symptom of the most severe dissociative disorder, which is called dissociative identity disorder. So the reason why I wanted to put these video notes, the reason why I wanted to discuss that is because it is such a widespread myth that people with schizophrenia have multiple personalities, and they absolutely do not. So let's delve into the dissociative disorders. And to do so, I want to begin with just looking at the continuum of dissociative disorders. Woo, there we go. So with anything, and dissociative disorders are no different, each psychological disorder, in essence, is on a continuum. And on the normal side of the continuum, which most of us have experienced, is something called highway hypnosis. And it's not a dissociative disorder. Highway hypnosis is considered on the normal end, where this is the most severe in symptom end over here. But highway hypnosis will open the door to allowing us to understand a little bit about what it would be like to have a dissociative disorder. So highway hypnosis is a common condition, but it does involve, it's a very common occurrence. It's also not a disorder. Most of us have experienced it sometimes every week. And what happens with highway hypnosis when you're driving a familiar location is you kind of zone out and then you zone back in later on. So for instance, like let's say you are used to driving down one pathway, and so you're driving down there and you kind of zone out at Ulmerton Road, let's say about, and then you're like, oh my, I'm already at Drew Street, right? And you have no memory of how you got there, in essence. And by the way, you cannot have those memories back. You were dissociated during that experience. So during highway hypnosis and dissociative disorders in general, you have a loss of memory. In other words, you lose time. You have a loss of time that you cannot recapture. It just begins, just like it just started around Ulmerton Road, and it just ends, just like it ended at Drew Street. But in hindsight, you have lost time. If you looked at the clock when it began and you looked at the clock where it ended, it's different. Also, you are functioning during the dissociation. You were driving a car, right? We're all functioning during this dissociation. We're all responding to traffic. We're maintaining the functioning of our car. But what's happening is the memory has a loss. There's just a disconnection between you and your memory. And that's highway hypnosis, and that is not a disorder. It is very, quote unquote, normal. And again, if the topic of discussion I didn't write down for you would be dissociative disorders, realizing that highway hypnosis is not a disorder. It is a common, normal occurrence. And maybe I should kind of add that in there. Whoops. All right, we can do it. There we go. I don't want anyone to think that that is a dissociative disorder. Highway hypnosis is normal and common. Okay, so again, we'll kind of shift that over there so that we have it. So that's the situation there. Now let's imagine, and let's go into the dissociative disorders, and let's look at dissociative amnesia. And with dissociative amnesia, oh my goodness. me and this whiteboard today. With dissociative amnesia, what happens, during hypnosis, you have a loss of time. You have a loss of contact with your memory, in essence. With dissociative amnesia, it follows trauma, and it's a long period of time. And the person in an amnestic state will experience a fugue state, F-U-G-U-E. And a fugue state is a period of time in which you're disconnected from your memory, so to speak. And with dissociative amnesia, just like in highway hypnosis, you had a brief time. In dissociative amnesia, it's a longer period of time. So you can imagine how scary that is to gain awareness, and you don't know where you are, and you don't know how you got there, and you don't know why you're there. And that is something that can occur with dissociative amnesia. There is a type of dissociative amnesia. It is not common, but it nonetheless is relevant. And it's a type of dissociative amnesia. I'm just going to go down here. Oh my goodness. I just clicked all over the place here. It is a type of dissociative amnesia, and it's called dissociative, O-C-I-A-T-I-V-E, fugue. And with dissociative fugue, the person, not fuguer, dissociative fugue, the person flees and travels during that amnestic period. So, in other words, they've experienced a type of trauma, and they have that prolonged break from memory. They can also have multiple episodes of this. They're in places and they don't know how they got there. They don't know what happened before, and it's, as you can imagine, unsettling. And if they also experience the rare type of dissociative fugue, they flee and travel, sometimes across the country, during that amnestic period. And a very rare type of dissociative fugue is where a person can, during the fugue state, during the prolonged time where they're experiencing loss of memory, they can just have one identity and they don't remember who they originally are. And then when the fugue state ends, when the dissociative fugue period ends, they don't remember the time in fugue, but they remember their life prior. And so that is a very rare type, but it's one identity at a time. So it's not, dissociative identity disorder or multiple personalities. It's one type at a time. And we see dissociative amnesia and dissociative fugue is a very rare type of it with people who have experienced extreme trauma. And the most extreme, which is at the highest end of this continuum here, is dissociative identity disorder, or DID. And dissociative identity disorder, or DID, was formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder. So I want to spend some time discussing DID. And what characterizes DID is at least one additional sub-identity. So the person has multiple identity states. They're also called multiple personalities. They're also called multiple sub-identities. Whatever it is, they have themselves and they have at least one other. And before we get into that, I want you to realize that the dissociative disorders are trauma-related disorders. If the person did not experience prolonged trauma, they would not be experiencing a dissociative disorder. So they clearly are trauma-related disorders. And I just want to take a pause before we erase this. I want to take a pause and I want to talk about this a little bit. So one of the characterizing features of this is that the person is very adept at using self-hypnosis as a protective strategy. Self-hypnosis is very protective, and let's talk about it in general because we all might rely on that. Many people do. I want you to imagine if you have to go to a dental appointment or a doctor's appointment where they're doing things that are invasive and uncomfortable, and you have to cope through it. And let's say the dentist, and let's say that you don't like the sound of the drill thing going in your mouth, and you're not comfortable with people in your mouth, you're not comfortable with people working on your teeth, scraping your teeth, mouth shots, whatever it is. And so you are not taking a medication or anything like that. You're not taking Valium or a benzodiazepine. Instead, you're coping on your own. How many of you may go to just think about something else? Some of you may think about a happy place. Some of you might think about memories that you have, and you might work through those memories. Some of you might compose your homework, or think about a paper, or think about a task that you're working on, or thinking about what you're going to do about something, or think about whatever it is that allows you to be somewhere other than your body, right? And so then whatever is happening to your body, you're protected from because you're somewhere else. That is imposing self-hypnosis, and that is a coping strategy when something that happens to our body is very difficult or even unbearable for us to endure. And what happens with people who are experiencing profound, often sexual invasion and trauma that is of the most severe kind and the most long-standing and invasive type is the psyche protects itself by self-hypnosis, and the psyche fragments so that an identity is created that is brought out because of reality. People with dissociative disorders maintain reality. With DID, they just do it with the emergence of multiple personalities. But to protect the psyche, a sub-identity emerges that can handle the situation at hand, protecting the body or the original person from having those memories. And so the original person is losing time. They're experiencing those fugue states while another identity is in control of the body. And what brings out that other identity is the demands of reality. In other words, to maintain reality, this sub-identity protects the psyche, protects the body, handles this situation, and then when the demands of reality changes, a switch occurs and another sub-identity comes to the forefront. And so each personality has its own memories, because when the demands of reality elicit that experience and that personality is in control, so to speak, of the body, that personality, the experiences are housed in that personality, protected from the body, while the body experiences fugue states. And so they have their own memories, their own attitudes, their own skills, their own experiences, their own ways of dressing, their own maybe even names, their own ways of being. And before that sounds too bizarre, I want us to take a minute and I want us to look at our own lives for a second. We have different personality states. We're not a fragmented sense of self, we're a continual sense of self, but we have different personality states. For instance, when your student identity shifts to the forefront, you might dress in a certain way. People may call you a name that you don't go by with your family. You walk in the door of the classroom when we were in the classroom together and your student identity emerges. You have behaviors during that personality state where you would sit and write notes or sit and learn, and maybe you know people in that environment, but you don't know them in any other environment. You might use a different language because you might use psychological terms while you're in that personality state, whereas when you're not, you don't. And then if you think about it, when you are at work, there's a different personality state that emerges. People may call you a different name there. You may dress differently. You have a different set of skills that emerge at work. You even may have a different type of personality, in essence, that emerge. You might be more willing to take direction from others. You may be more less confrontive when you're frustrated. You may have a different type of experience that comes to the forefront. And then when you go home, you might walk in the door and get on comfy clothes, so you might dress differently. Your world of home may refer to you by a different name, by a nickname, or by your given name or something like that. You may have different attitudes, like you may be really neat and organized at work and messy and laid back at home, etc. But you're a consistent sense of self throughout those different personality states. However, you have different personality states like we all do. However, someone with dissociative identity disorder does not have that consistent thread of self. Instead, when a switch occurs, the body is unaware of it. And so instead of being Kim all the time, even though people might call me Professor Molinaro, let's say, or Kimberly in other contexts, or Kim or whatever, and I have different skills that emerge, different behaviors that emerge, I'm a consistent sense of self and I have memories of all of it. But if those personality states were fragmented, that opens the door to more understanding how dissociative identity disorder is experienced by the person. And because of the severe trauma and because of the horrific experiences that they have endured, their identity states are fragmented to protect the psyche from the trauma and the pain and the psychological pain of these experiences they have endured. People with dissociative identity disorder are probably some of the strongest people, because despite horrific trauma, the worst trauma, they are resilient, they are powerful, they are strong, and their psyche is coping as best as their psyche can. I am in awe of the resiliency of people that have endured that depth of psychological trauma, psychological torture, and the ways in which they continue to cope through it. Their personality states, yes, are fragmented, and there's treatment to fuse together while accepting the memories, which would be extremely difficult and painful type of therapy, typically done inpatient care and then some outpatient care. But to fuse together personality states mean that the personality states have to accept those memories. And the idea of therapy is integration, not full integration necessarily, but integration to the point of increasing functioning and wellness and living as full of a life as possible. Because we wouldn't have the dissociative disorders if we didn't have people who abused other people. These disorders would be eradicated if people no longer abuse one another in these horrific, terrible ways. I hope this discussion helps you understand the profound strength of people who have endured experiences that no one should have to endure. Often invasive sexual trauma that is just unbearable. And their psyche responds with resilience by dissociating and therefore having loss of time, loss of memory, fragmentations of memory, and in the case of dissociative identity disorder, sub-identities. So I hope this discussion is helpful, and I hope that we can just all reflect on the incredible strength of people who endure and overcome.